You're listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with Jess Wiener. Don't worry. This is a joyful podcast about life, death, and everything in between. Well, if you've been listening to the episodes of We're All Gonna Die Anyway, you know that probably my biggest passion point in doing this show was to demystify and help to normalize issues like death and loss, and how all of that can really lead us towards urgently living, really tapping into what we want to spend our time making and creating and experiencing in the world. That's what I call living the good life, a life you love on your own terms. That's kind of my goal, and the goal of the show was to really kind of explore all of those taboo areas. And one of the most taboo areas I still think we have to tackle is the idea of mental health and the issue of mental health, especially when we talk about mental health and business. Those of us who work in corporate capacities, those of us who have, careers in the business sector, mental health still is taboo in talking about. And when we talk about leadership and when we talk about who we admire as leaders, we often talk about all of these characteristics of confidence and certainty and courage, but so much underneath in real leadership I've come to find, including in my own story, is vulnerability and compassion and fear and anxiety and panic and all of these other things that we are so scared to admit that we have and that we experience. So I wanted to bring onto the show a woman who I greatly admire, who has written about and spoken about these topics publicly. Her name is Morra Aarons-Mele, and you've seen her work from Harvard Business Review to Oprah to New York Times to Guardian. She created an incredibly important online platform called Women Online. And she herself is a podcast host. In fact, I'll be coming up on her podcast in the near future. Her podcast is for the Harvard Business Review. It's called The Anxious Achiever. Morra wrote a book that you should get if you don't have it already. It's called Hiding in the Bathroom, a roadmap to getting out there when you'd rather stay home. Little do we know that would be the reality for all of us, extroverts and introverts alike. But Morra talks quite openly about how she is a deeply sensitive, anxious introvert with extrovert tendencies. And I could so relate to that. I think when we look at who we admire and how we admire them and who we hold up in our culture, if we put too many of us on a pedestal, if we put the idea of success and achievement and this rise and grind hustle culture out there first, we're hurting ourselves. We're hurting each other because it betrays the real work of the work, which is even the most successful, even the most accomplished people struggle with mental health challenges. And that if we don't begin to unlock and understand our own relationship to mental health, there is no way possible, in my opinion, we create a good life, because we're going to be living a life that is hiding a little bit, to Morra's point, in the shadows, is concealing, is playing small. So what I found so exciting in this conversation, I can't wait for you to listen in, is the permission to be ambitious and to be anxious, to be bold and powerful and to feel depressed and experience depression. None of these things are mutually exclusive. They're what I call yes and principles. Yes, we can be an amazing leader and we can struggle with panic attacks. And both Morra and I talk about that in this conversation. We're both very honest about our own challenges. We talk a lot about therapy and getting the right kind of support, and a lot of other tools that I hope you'll find useful and helpful as you begin to create the good life for yourself. So without further ado, let's meet my friend Morra Aarons-Mele. Let's dig in. I'm very happy that we get a chance to talk about this, this being our life and where we're at right now, because we're certainly in crazy, uncharted territory for all of us. And it's bringing up a lot, which I want to get to. But there's so much I know about you professionally. There's not a lot that I know because, we've worked in circles, but I don't know a ton about your personal journey. And one of the things that I would love to start with, if you're open to it, is I'd love to know what you know about your birth story and where you were born and how that was for your mom. Like, do you know what's the legacy or story about your being in this world?
Oh God. Well, it's a really, it's a really firstborn story. So I feel like anyone out there who's listening who is the very wanted child of a parent who struggled to
Mm.
have a child and
Ah.
had will understand. So my mom, Pam, Pam, everyone calls her Pam. She had me about, I would say, less than 2 years after she delivered a stillborn baby boy,
Oh, wow.
who was her first child. And that, of course, was an unspeakable trauma because, back in those days, I was born in 1976. They didn't know that. And so
Right.
she didn't know he was dead until right before, and she had to deliver him fully.
Oh,
So yes, that's probably a trigger warning for anybody at the top of the show.
yeah.
So she did that. And then miraculously, she always says, got pregnant with me, like 4 or 5 months later. But when I was in utero, her anxiety about me and if I was going to die, as she tells it, was always so intense that she checked herself into the hospital a couple times,
Wow.
because she would say, I just felt safe there. I just needed to know that you weren't going to die. And so I was born, and I'm 6'1" and extremely hale and hearty, but it was always this sense. And then I have a younger sister who's 2 years younger than me. I always knew
Mm.
um, the sort of stakes were very high with me.
Yeah. How does that play out in your life? How, like, is that a story you're hearing a lot as you were younger, your birth story? Is that something she shared
Hmm.
readily?
Hmm.
Yeah.
She would always start to cry.
Oh,
But I think I knew about that when I was really little. I
yeah.
also, my father was quite a bit older. And so I have an older half sister from his first marriage, and she's
Okay.
about 20 years older than me. So he had her. But then my mom, I was her firstborn.
Yeah. What does that do
Yeah.
for you as a kid? Does it put a lot of pressure on you unknowingly to kind of fit a bill or to be something that, you felt like you needed to be?
Well, I definitely had that, and that's like a whole
Yeah.
other story. I don't know that that's connected to my birth story. I
Got it.
think, I think what it did do is the level of anxiety was always really high,
Mm.
and I mean, God bless my mother, because once I was, 4 or 5 or 6, I was very free range, and I did whatever I want, and I actually had too much freedom later. But I think there was definitely this sense of like, I was so precious to her,
Yeah.
always so
Yeah.
precious, which
Where
is
did
wonderful. But
Yeah, but it can also feel like a lot too as a little
yes,
person
yes.
knowing that. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in South Orange, New Jersey, right outside New York City.
Jersey.
Yep, and yep, commuter bedroom town, right on NJ Transit. And then my parents split, and my dad moved to Rhinebeck, New York, which is in the
Mm.
Hudson Valley, which is really beautiful. And so, I was sort of, starting when I was about 6 or 7 or 8, got shuttled a lot between the
Mm.
two of them. And he mostly lived up there. Yeah.
So you split childhood time between Rhinebeck and South
I
Orange.
went to school in South Orange,
Got it.
but weekends and summers, and but I would say also that the focal point was always New York City, because that's
Mhm.
where, my dad worked. All our, our family was there. It was like always, somehow commuting in and out and through New York,
That's
between New
amazing.
Jersey. Yeah.
So if you could look back on your childhood more and kind of like 3 words top of mind that you would describe it, how would you describe it in 3 words?
Well, I describe it the same way, which is no adult supervision.
Okay, there is
Which,
3 words, but tell me about that. What
yeah.
does that mean?
So I, uh, even though I am precious to my mom, it was different back then,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Parenting was not what it is now. And, my parents had a lot going on. And, once my parents split, I was sort of a grown up. And,
Mm.
which meant I took care of my younger sister. I was always, I cooked. I just was very, very independent. I was
Mm.
very independent. I was extremely, extremely hypervigilant, which I think is like the biggest legacy of what I live with today from my childhood
Yes.
in terms of anxiety, because
Yep.
I felt like I had to take care of things. My mom, now I know and I understand, she was kind of a wreck. She was very anxious. There was a lot going on.
Mm.
My father was not on the scene a lot, and then once I was a teenager, it was like whatever,
Yeah.
all bets are off here. So no adult supervision.
What I heard independence as one of the side effects of that could be positive and it can be positive in your life. What are some other benefits that you found from that experience that you could pull from to say this made you who you are now?
I think everyone's childhood makes them who they are. And that's the legacy that we have to unpack for
Yeah,
many
that is
years,
for sure.
obviously. So for me, on the plus side, my parents were cool. My
Hmm.
dad, by day, was a labor arbitrator, but was an art dealer as well. And they had a gallery and they collected art. And so, like when I was young, they would take us into kind of really cool galleries on the Lower East Side, and
Mm.
artist studios in the Bronx, and there were always artists around, and um, they were very interesting. Like they were also extremely subversive for suburban parents,
Mm.
but they were also like so interesting. And so they just
Huh.
took us to a lot of places and gave me like a tremendous cultural understanding. They were smart, they were curious, they were both totally self-made. They
Hmm.
came from backgrounds that were totally different from the life they aspired to. So I credit my curiosity, my
Mhm.
love of art and exploring and culture and all the things that make me me very
Yeah.
much to my parents. Yeah.
Yeah. When did you first, as you're telling the story of your mom having anxiety as you were in utero and kind of her fear of losing for obvious reasons of what she experienced, what has your relationship been with anxiety? Like, did you have a name for it early enough for yourself? Did you know that's something that impacted you, or did you come to that later in your life?
I didn't get a formal diagnosis till I was 19, when I had clinical depression and anxiety. I think I was always very anxious. When I was 3, apparently I was so agoraphobic I wouldn't go outside for a whole summer.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was a very anxious kid. But again, I don't think back then they diagnosed
No.
kids. But I
Mm-mm.
was very high strung. I was very neurotic. I had a lot going on. I
Mhm.
didn't have a lot of friends. I was kind of weird. And I was very smart. And so, yeah, I always had
Mhm.
anxiety, but I was not diagnosed till I was 19.
And then how did your life shift after that? After the diagnosis, after you kind of have a framework?
Well, I had this mother who was clinically anxious and pretty anorexic for most of my childhood. And so I knew anxiety really well
Mhm.
because I knew what it was like to live with someone who was both very anxious and depressed a lot. And that's
Mm.
her story to tell. That's not my story,
Mhm.
but I don't think she'd mind me saying that. So I was sort of scared of it. But
Mhm.
when I was 19 and I just went through this horrific depression where I couldn't get out of bed, and then I had a panic attack in the university library and couldn't walk. And um, I guess it all made sense,
Yeah.
but it was such a painful time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And this is something like in your life as you've lived it from the age of 19, has it played like kind of had a front row seat in your life?
It's my traveler. It's my traveling
Yeah.
companion. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I don't know if you feel this way about anxiety. It is perhaps it's one of my most intimate relationships. It might actually be my most intimate
Mm.
relationship, which is
That's interesting.
depending on who you're talking to. Either some people are like, that's pathetic, get over it. And I think for a lot of people, it might actually make sense. So it's funny. It travels with me. I mean, I think with the depression, I've had probably 4 or 5 pretty intense clinical depressions in
Mhm.
the past 20. I'm 40, almost 44, so 19 to 44. 4 or 5 clinical depressions, but anxiety has been my constant companion.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize this until a couple of years ago, but I realize now that I've, for better or ill, shaped a lot of my life around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes total sense. I mean,
You do?
yeah, I do, because I think for me, so I was very much later in life when I got diagnosed, and I think that I maybe was very high functioning. I mean, we want to talk about that because you were high functioning also despite
Beyond.
anxiety, right? I mean, and that's the thing that I think, like, sometimes when we talk about depression or we talk about anxiety, we paint, at least most people paint a picture of what that looks like, of who that person looks like, right? And it seems like they can't get their act together and they're, not very, ambitious. And I found it to be quite the opposite, right? Like
Yeah.
yours, you described it as your traveler. I would say mine was my dirty secret, right? Mine was
Mm.
my, like, for a long time, a recessed part of myself that I was afraid to invite in. Like, she always has a seat at the table for sure. She's a loud voice in my head. I think I've operated around it a lot until
Mm.
I actually stepped into understanding the diagnosis. And part of my diagnosis as well was PTSD. I had other things that had happened in my life that contributed to that hypervigilance and that anxiety. And I didn't even realize that was something I could have. I always thought that was reserved for war veterans, not necessarily people who've had tremendous trauma in their life.
100%. Did you feel like once you accepted and sort of like invited her to the table, she was less threatening or less scary?
I think we're learning how to love each other or dance with
Yeah.
each other or just engage with each other differently. And I do personalize her. So I don't find it bizarre that you say, that's why I didn't find it bizarre that you say, this is an intimate relationship I have, because this is us. Like, this is a part of me. She is
Mm-hmm.
she's what I call
100%.
it. She's a part of me. She is me. She's a way that I've learned to cope in the world. She's a multitude of factors that have, like, brought her into my life. And in fact, some of the things I quite like about myself are because of that. I have incredible attention to detail because of hypervigilance. I'm a total
Oh
multitasker
my
because of
God.
that, right? Like,
Oh,
I mean, that's why I was asking, like, what did you find that kind of served you, like, in that no adult, in our childhood space? Because now I look back and I'm trying to reframe and reclaim, like, oh, the stuff that, was pretty terrible at times, or things that weren't desirable, also served to build me in a way and a part of me that I actually like right now.
I
My,
mean,
you know,
yeah, but this to me is like, you hear a lot about grit and resilience, and there's a lot of study being done on ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences, right? And how
right.
trauma shapes kids. And of course, everyone's different and everyone has a different reaction to trauma. But I think we tend to glamorize grit a lot.
Yes.
And I think that grit and resilience is amazing, but I think that for many of us, we have tremendous grit, we have tremendous resilience, we have drive, but the downside and the baggage of that is the anxiety and the hypervigilance, and that
Yes.
stays. That's the sort of monkey, on our back
Yes.
or
Yes.
whatever. Whereas the grit we let shine. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Well, and yeah, oh, it does make sense. And you also have written about, because I know I've quoted you on this, and we've talked a lot about the hustle porn in our
Yeah,
culture,
yeah.
right? You wrote about that.
Entrepreneurship porn. Yeah,
Yeah, the entrepreneurship porn, and just we worship at the altar of busy, and we sort of, revere and respect these attributes of success that, on surface feel like they deserve to be, rewarded. But if you dig a little bit deeper into the impact it can have on somebody's life, it's quite disturbing, actually. And,
absolutely.
you
And the
know,
impulsivity that might make you an awesome entrepreneur will wreak havoc and cause hell also to
yes,
your relationships, your finances, and we just glamorize the hell out of all of it.
all of it. And we kind of tell our stories that, especially now in a really performative culture, we can just tell all the parts that we want to tell, and kind of dial in. One of the things I was curious about as you were talking, though, was if, because you had the benefit, and I look at it as the benefit just in against my own story of knowing kind of what was going on for you internally at age 19, as you then go through college, create your career, form relationships, and become a mother yourself. Did the way that you were parented impact the way you wanted to parent and the way that you wanted to show up as a mom for your kids?
For sure. And um the one important piece of context is that in my, I grew up in Jewish New York City, basically, right, in the suburbs, where literally everyone I knew was a therapist. I mean, all of my parents' best friends were therapists, so it was totally normal to be in your head and in
Mm,
therapy. And, you know, my sister and I are both brought to therapy at very young ages. So that was not at all like a weird revelation for me, like it may
oh,
be
that's
for
amazing.
people who come from different cultures. Um, yeah, I mean, though I wanted to parent very much not like my parents parented me.
Right.
You know, but parts of them I do cherish, you
Yeah.
know. I think for me, the thing that I'm so scared of is divorce and the
Mm,
breaking up of the family.
yeah.
Because I think that was, you know, that was fundamental in changing how my parents parented me. And
Hmm.
that probably has more impact on how I try to live my life now. Not that I judge divorce, you know, a lot of people need to get divorced and are better for it. But for me, um, that's the thing that I think I like wear very heavily is,
Yeah.
you know, how can I keep this marriage good? Because my parents had such a terrible marriage and made such bad, ugh, and they don't believe in marriage. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
I always think about, I wish I was introduced to therapy younger. I love therapy. I have been a participant in it for a majority of my adult life. And currently now I upped my therapy time to 3 times a week while we're
Ugh,
in this moment because I know I just need the extra, tools and framework. But, it's funny as I think about kind of, what you're saying, something my therapist has said to me at some point when I was sort of ruminating on like, will I do this differently than my parents? Or like, I want to do something, different. And she said something to the effect of like, you're already going to be doing it differently because you're asking these questions.
yeah, I
Like
think that's
most of
right.
the things that we wanted to perhaps correct from our childhood experience with our parents often came because they either didn't have exposure, didn't do the work personally, didn't have, just different time, different space. And there's lots of reasons. I mean, our parents are adults and we know this about adults. They have their own lives and lessons and things to be learned. But I think I think about that quite a bit every time I think like, oh my God, am I going to do this differently? And I always get reminded like, right, if I'm even asking myself that question, I'm already in a better space of awareness of doing that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's so true, you know, and to me, the wonderful thing about getting older is being able to separate from my parents and looking at them as humans
As people, yeah.
who came from real trauma. And I don't think it's a cop out in many ways to say they did the best they could. They,
Mhm.
you know, and then there's the days that I look in the mirror and I am my mother and I say something and I'm like, oh my God, I'm my mother.
Yep.
God help me, you know?
I don't know
So
that we ever get to escape that actually, as much work as we do or as hard as we try. I totally relate obviously to the Jewish upbringing. I only spent New York summers with my grandparents, but also probably a very familiar cultural upbringing and experience. Can we talk a little bit about how in your family you experienced loss or talked about loss? Did you have deaths in your family or in your life early on? Like I'm curious how that was spoken about in your family.
um, we didn't have anyone significant early on. My father was older, and so
Mhm.
his sibling, you know, his family had deaths when I was still a young teenager.
Mhm.
Um, I think the most formative two things were, you know, we had a lot of animals in my house, and we had a lot of animals die, and that was really sad. But my grandmother tried to commit suicide when I was 14, when I was sleeping in her living room.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so I feel like that was the moment of 13, 14, really coming to terms with the weight of my mother's pain.
Yeah, that's your mom's mom.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So, um, it was, yeah.
What and she did not kill herself that night?
No, she revived. We sent the
Whoa.
EMT. She revived and she was okay. She had been saving up on morphine, and
Wow, Maura.
I was sleeping on the sofa and she overdosed. And
How did you know that? Did you
I
discover that?
didn't. We woke up in the morning and she was like, and I thought that maybe that's how old people sleep, you
Sleep.
know. And or my mother and I are wandering around the the apartment in the morning because, you know, she lived in California. We had come to visit her from the East
Oh
Coast. We
my
didn't see her
God.
very much. She was a kind of a recluse. Yeah. So that's,
Yeah.
you know, and it's funny because we would always talk about it kind of jokingly. But I think that was a formative experience, obviously,
Yeah.
for my mom and I about like, what does family mean in
And
this
how did did
equation?
your mom have words for that? Because that's also her mother she's watching go through that.
Yes, that was
Yeah.
just, she was a damaged person. That's who she was.
Yeah.
Imagine if that was your mother.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can understand that legacy of pain passed down, whether it's conscious or unconscious or spoken of or not spoken of, it lands.
Yeah.
It lands in us. So I can only
Yeah.
imagine at 13 and 14 how that ramped up your hypervigilance. Were you able to sleep after that?
I was, you know, the other thing, God, I've never talked about this. The other thing that I was just thinking about is my parents taught me how to drive when I was 11 because my dad had a really bad heart condition. And for some reason, and we used to travel together to see family in England, and I would drive.
Oh
And
my God. You would drive in
I would
England?
drive stick shift other side of the road because they wanted me to be, and then I was like in the US, you know, my dad he must have had a scary experience one night where he went to the hospital and it was just me and my sister up there, and he lived quite distant from anything. And we all agreed it was a good idea for me to be able to drive. Now I was 6 feet tall when I was 11.
Oh
So I
my
was also
gosh.
driving because my father was also very ill a lot. So now that I look back on this poor 14-year-old who's like painfully tall, very awkward,
And
driving everywhere.
responsible.
Totally.
I mean, like, that's a hell of a lot of responsibility. I've never
I
even driven
know.
on the other side of the road in England.
Drive here too. I mean, so like again, things that would
Yeah,
never happen today because
right.
like how illegal is that? That was my childhood. It was just like you gotta fend for yourself in this world.
I bet you will. And I know this, but it serves you very well when you go out into the working world, these kinds of experiences, that sort of
Absolutely.
like resilience and independence and strength. Like we get rewarded in corporate life with that.
Hypervigilance, I think it's funny. I've talked about this with Jerry Colonna. Hypervigilance is quite rewarded if
Mhm.
you can let it go enough to also bring in creativity and let other people have room. Like that's hard.
What was your career trajectory like? I know you've done a lot of incredible things, but were they always all planned? Like, talk to me about sort of no, like most people's career paths, sort of accidental, but also fabulous. Like,
Totally. You know, I mean, I come from a lot of privilege. I need to say that. You
yeah.
know, I went to Brown University. You know, my parents were not wealthy, but I went, you know, they gave me a very good life.
Mhm.
And so I worked in film when I graduated. I wanted to work in independent film in the worst way. I was obsessed with the movies, and I
Mm.
was a publicity assistant at a fabulous independent production company that produced many of the 90s, like big and 2000s biggest, you know, if you're an art house fan, you'd know it. And and I loved that. But uh the internet happened. And this
Mm.
was 99,
Mhm.
98, 99. And all of my smart friends were going to work at startups. And I was like, this is cool. And so I read Variety every morning because it was my
Yep.
job to do publicity clips. Back in the day, we had barely gotten email, and I'd come into the office every morning and I'd get all the newspapers and the trade pubs, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, to look for news articles about our movies. And I read this article in Variety about this website called iVillage.com, which
Mhm.
was this big women's website, online community for women. And then the head of corporate communications for NBC had left to go work at iVillage. And I thought, I want to do that. And I wrote her a fax. This is like,
You're
I can do
speaking my
that. Like,
language. Go
I can
ahead.
drive when I'm 11. I can
Right.
totally. So I wrote her a fax, and I sent the fax, and I said, to whom it may concern, does Ms. Betty Hudson need an assistant? And like 2 hours later, I got a call to be her executive. And that was it.
That's incredible.
It
By the
was
way, for those
amazing.
listening, a fax in the way, way back machine, sort of like a hybrid between an email and a text. But I get it. But also, this is what I love about the time actually like internet in all of our lives was I also took extraordinary risks like that in my life, faxing, calling. Remember back in the day when you actually had to pick up a phone to reach somebody? Like we took risks in some ways too, because this is my theory, because I didn't really see how anybody else did it. So I think if I would have known what was like right to do or not right to do, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I was just so like ballsy and like,
There was no narrative.
no, there was no
There was
narrative.
no LinkedIn.
Right. There were no tips and tools of how to ask for a job. You just like said, does Miss Betty need an assistant?
I mean, I was like, what do I have to lose? You
didn't. You got that.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually said this in a podcast today, and I was thinking about, I did an episode on this generation coming out, graduating in the pandemic and how hard it is. But I also think the pressure that young people are under today, especially ambitious, educated ones, I literally did not know any better.
Nope. Me
If
neither.
I said, I knew no better.
I started my first business when I was 21, and I did it in Indianapolis where I knew nobody. I was living with a boyfriend at the time. I had no family, no friends, just this boyfriend. And I look back now and I didn't even know what the word entrepreneur was. I just did it. I took a community college class to learn how to write grants so I could try to get money to start my business. I got $5,000 in this pitch contest to start my business. And then I didn't know that I could raise money against the $5,000. Like I just thought I had $5,000 I had to use for the whole year. So I was like super stingy and like, and I started a theater company, and I look back on that time and I thought, my God, ignorance is bliss. Like I really genuinely had no roadmap. In some ways, I miss that I didn't have a community, because I wish that I would have had people that would have said like, oh, what you're doing is entrepreneurship or producing, or like I didn't have the language, but honestly, it didn't really matter. I just did the things that I wanted to do at a particular point in our culture where you could, as a hungry person. I think you're right. I think sometimes now there's analysis paralysis for kids as far as like what to do.
And also like, I knew the downside wasn't that bad. It wasn't like I made a lot of money, but you could get an assistant job that gave you healthcare, 401k, and like barely enough to live on very easily in the 1990s. So it was like, what do I have to lose?
And so you started at iVillage, and then I used to write for them a million years ago too.
Did you really?
Yeah, I totally did. In the body image section. Where I feel like all health editors went to that, section. And then what guided you? We don't have to go down your resume bit by bit, but I am curious, like mostly I think knowing that you're sort of like understanding or at least exploring the relationship you have with anxiety. You're also clearly like high functioning, educated, like ambitious, doing those things, which again, I think is important for people to know, absolutely live side by side. Like sometimes it's crippling, most times it's not. So we're out in the world. We are your people. We are all around you. But as you're building and you're doing it, what motivates you to jump from career moment to career moment? Like what typically would drive you to the next thing you would do?
A lot of times it was depression. I mean, here's the downside, and I've written about this quite a bit in my book. So I had many, many jobs as a young woman before I was 30. I would have a bout of depression or anxiety, clinical anxiety, where I would basically cry all day. And then I'd get a new job because I would hope that it would solve it.
Right.
So when I was at iVillage in New York, and I was smart and I was capable. I wasn't an assistant very long. They promoted me. I was a PR manager. I wrote press. I had a great job. Then they opened up a joint venture in the UK. And of course, I loved the UK. I had studied there. My family's there. I said, I'm going. I don't know. I'll figure this out. And I got myself a pretty damn good job. They sent me to UK, all expenses paid.
Wow.
And that was great. But very hard. And then I got headhunted to be the head of marketing for a big online travel company. And I was like 25. Like this was a really big deal. But I was so insecure. I had no self-esteem. And I was so lonely, anxious, and depressed that I cried every day. I took no responsibility at that job. I let my male colleague take all the credit, even though I was the head of marketing. and
Mm.
I quit after 9 months. I emotionally could not handle it. And I regret that so much, because I was really poised for C-suite greatness,
Mm.
but my mental health and my maturity was not there. And we didn't have the networks to help then.
No,
I
no,
really could
not
have
then.
used a women's email list, but we
Right.
didn't, so
So how do you recover from that? How do you rebound, but most importantly, how do you take care of yourself during that time? What are the tools available to you to do that?
antidepressants,
Mhm.
switching up your meds. I got
Yep.
into yoga at that time. I think it's such a cliche, but yoga really helps me.
Mhm.
And I moved to Africa. So,
Okay, let's go there. Tell me about that.
totally. That is what I did in my 20s. I lived many different places. I was like,
Wow.
here's what I can do. I can earn money, I can get a job, and I can protect myself. And I can find my way around anywhere. I can go anywhere. So even though, and my mother had breast cancer at the time too. So it was a very painful time, of course, because we had this bond. So on the outside, I'm literally like globe trotting marketing
Mm,
executive. And on the inside, I'm a crying little child.
right.
I drank a lot. I think alcohol in my 20s was also like my huge,
Yeah, soother.
huge soother. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so interesting because what you're describing in that cocktail of literal cocktail of
Yes.
ambition and
I thought you were
anxiety
going to say Ambien. I was like, yes.
or Ambien, ambition, and anxiety, all of the good A words. But that is like what I feel like I feel like sometimes these issues can masquerade behind those facades because it's what we've chosen to value, in so many ways. And especially if you're young and smart and ambitious, of course, those sorts of moments make sense. But I'm happy that we can unpack this a bit and
Mhm.
deconstruct it a bit for those who might be listening who feel like maybe like me that it's their big secret, or maybe like you that it's like their deepest relationship or an intimate relationship. But I just think it's important to name it so we can normalize it.
It's, I mean, that's the thing, is that as normal as anxiety is, and as life changing as it can be, to separate from it and be able to look at it in the face and have a managing relationship with it,
Yeah.
it's also, there's no reason to be in pain, especially if your life on the outside, you have not been through a trauma. I can look back at that girl and I can think, God, you had everything and
Hmm.
yet you were in pain. Why?
Yeah.
But I
But
was.
but sometimes too, don't you think this? I mean, for me, my experience is I feel like when you're in pain and the pain goes unnoticed, though, that is trauma.
Hmm.
When you are in pain and it's not named or it's not supported, it's not nurtured, that's traumatic to have
Mm.
that go unnoticed. It's my experience is
Hmm.
that it's, you know, I would end up, I think, identifying or looking for external points of validation for worthiness or being seen instead
No.
of having those tools developed to say, right, who am I? What do I value? What is important to me? And that what is important to me matters. Like it's not just mantra. I think as younger people, like as and and I'm not raising my own children. I'm a part of many children's lives, but it's the one thing that I try to focus on the most is seeing all parts of this little person in my life, because I can remember thinking I needed to conceal some of those parts of me when I was little because they wouldn't be lovable or they were too
Oh,
much,
too much, 100%. And you get so good at being good. You
Yes.
get so good at knowing what people will respond to positively,
Yep.
that will raise you in their esteem or whatever, so you can manage. It's like living a dual life.
It sure is. To me, that's where it came crumbling down not too long ago. I had always, I think, the depression has always been low standing for me, like low level. I've never had serious bouts of clinical depression where I couldn't get out of bed or I couldn't function,
Mhm.
but I have, I think, what they call dysthymia, which is like
Mhm.
always this sort of low level of depression. The anxiety and panic were a newer part for me in my adult life. I think I didn't recognize what panic attacks were in the past. Again, I think I understood them intellectually. I don't think I was allowing myself to be like, oh, I'm actually having one of those, right? I would instead bring forth that negative voice of like, I would feel those feelings, and then I would have my shamer come in and tell me what a horrible person I am for feeling those feelings, right? Instead of like, which is like the worst thing anybody needs in the middle of a panic attack is to feel more like shit. And, that I would do that to myself. And so it prohibited me, I think, really from asking for help because I thought these were things I should manage. And then I had an experience where I had to stop a plane from taking off because I thought I was having a heart attack. And my panic attack was so severe that I thought I was having a heart attack. I was like vomiting, had vertigo. Like I thought I was dying. I had never had anything that severe. And I had to I was flying alone. I had to ask for help. The flight, they stopped the plane. We hadn't fully pulled away from the jet bridge very much. And I'd never done that before. And I remember like feeling like I entered into the twilight zone where all of a sudden, like I was having the panic attack actively in my body. And my brain was also so hyper vigilant and aware that I was like, I hope to God nobody has cameras and this doesn't end up on YouTube. And oh my God, I can't believe I'm the person stopping the plane. This only happens in movies. Like I would have this narrative in my head, like somebody was narrating
Mhm.
my panic attack. And unfortunately, the flight attendants and the flight crew were not very kind. And so then I had this like heap of shame on top of it, which was
Yep.
like this, they were unkind in their words to me and their tone. But when I got off the plane and was trying to like rebook, because I've never had anything this severe. So I, of course, thought like I could get back on an airplane and do it again because I'm like, I must get home. But instead of being, I think, compassionate, which is definitely what I needed to say, maybe today's not the best day for you to fly back. Like, let's talk about it. I got met more with like, well, who's to say you're not going to do this again? How many times have you done this already? Like, this was my first major attack, and I was made to feel like I was deeply, deeply like wrong, like I was somehow scamming the system. And I remember that obviously for all the good girlness in me, like really triggered the shame. And I remember I walked around JFK airport for like 4 hours in complete hysterics, like not quite knowing where to go or what to do. By the way, not a lot of quiet rooms in JFK terminal I was in. I looked for maternity lounges. I looked for like
Oh my
places you
God.
could go and be quiet because I was so hyper stimulated and so having like the throes of a panic attack. I didn't know how to calm down. Even the chaplain wasn't available. I mean, I was like literally looking for peace and I couldn't find it. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, the whole thing just broke open for me. Like it just all of a sudden I was like, this is a thing. This requires more help, more support. You cannot manage this on your own anymore. And it is way bigger than you.
But imagine if we lived in a mentally healthy society or mentally literate society where the gate agent, who probably is trained in CPR, you know
Mhm.
that the flight attendants are,
Right.
could have thought, okay, this woman's having a panic attack. That is a severe physical reaction because it
Right.
is. Here's what we need to do.
I got the sense that they were more annoyed because I got the sense from some of the side conversations that I could hear them have that many people have panic attacks nowadays or
I'm
use panic
sure.
attacks for reasons why. And I felt like I got kind of lumped in with like the bad kids. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is my first time. I didn't use this as an excuse, but I could tell that they kind of unfortunately came from the camp of like, oh God, this isn't real. Like the
Right.
people who say this are
Right.
making it up.
Like another crazy high maintenance
Yep.
lady.
Who
Look,
like something's wrong,
dude,
and
I've been wheeled away by EMTs who've made me feel the same way.
really,
So absolutely, you're right. They do recognize it. They know you're
yeah,
not literally dying. They don't take it seriously.
no, but I opt into the picture that you just painted, which was like, right, what would it look like in a world where we were more sensitive to mental health and the way we are to physical health, um,
I'm so
and
sorry that happened though. That's terrible.
thanks. It was really terrible. It was, and I went to treatment after that. So I went to a program, more of an inpatient program that I could get some help from. I started medication, which I had never been on before and is incredible. And that plus a diagnosis plus some different kinds of therapy and help was really what put me on a path to be able to integrate it. And I would agree with you. I think now it is a very important part, important relationship and a part of my life. It's, in a way, I think I was crafting a life. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I was crafting a life around the symptoms of it. Sometimes as an avoidance, other times as a coping, and other times just out of ignorance of knowing how it really intersected in my world. And then you get rewarded for it. So it's quite addicting. The people love when you're successful. But so I would buy into that. But then to turn around to ask for help when you feel like you're up that high was really scary for me. So I felt like the crash that happened for me was a necessary one to be able to level it, to say, no, this is real. Take this seriously. And you're not alone, and there are resources, and there's, wonderful people to talk to about it. And I think that's also plays into part of these kinds of conversations that was deeply terrifying. I'm like, well, what else am I scared of? Oh, I'm scared of dying, or I'm scared of losing people, or I'm scared of, not being what I think I'm supposed to be. Oh, let's dig into that shit. Let's talk about all that stuff.
Totally. And I have to say that I think planes, you're probably right that the flight crew sees a lot of this, because planes are probably, for me, certainly deeply triggering for all of our loss and life, death issues and our control issues. They bring out travel brings out a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. But this has been honestly, in the end, it's a gift. I feel like I know myself more through that experience. I also feel like it made me really challenge like how I am spending my time. And I'm curious. So as you were in Africa, what were you doing in Africa, by the way? What were you working on there?
I was really just volunteering.
Okay.
Yeah, I was not working.
And when you're back and you're holding all of these other really impressive jobs and doing this big work, like what point for you was there a time or like a seminal moment where things unraveled, or you kind of thought to yourself, I want to course correct, I want to talk about this more publicly? Like, I don't know if that was what led up to the book, but I'm curious, like, how this becomes an aggregated force in your life.
For me, there was a magical time at Brown, ironically, the place where I was so depressed, so anxious, had not been able to set foot back on campus since I graduated for almost 20 years. Where I was, for some reason, I met the women's leadership team at Brown, and we sort of struck up a friendship. And one of the women there asked me to come speak to a bunch of excellent senior women and their mentors, and be the dinner speaker. And I spoke about this. I spoke about how I had been depressed and anxious for as many years as I could remember, how I cycled through jobs and continents and depended on drugs and alcohol, and was so perfect on paper, and yet such a screaming, sad wreck. Because, I also when I got back from Africa, I had a big career in politics, and, and that the life I was living was not who I was, and that I could not be that person. I wasn't ever going to be the CMO of a big company, or, I just wasn't going to be that person, or, the regular TV pundit that I had also tried to be, and then got so depressed at one point that I blew it all up, and CNN stopped calling, So I had to stop. And that's when I started working for myself. I started working from home. I just changed.
Do you think those saboteur moments were intentional when you say I blew it all up?
Oh, I've sabotaged so much.
Yeah.
Ugh. I still do sometimes. I say things that I shouldn't say. I'm better. I'm better in the past year since I've been doing a lot of really intense work. But I'm impulsive, and I make bad decisions when I'm anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety makes you make bad decisions sometimes. So if you're not in touch with your anxiety and in a good place with it, it can
Yeah.
make you make very bad decisions.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. I don't know what exactly you did on CNN. It's not important. We
I
have to
didn't do
talk
it on
about it.
camera. No, no,
Oh,
no. It
I was
wasn't like a Dan Harris situation. I
Oh
wish, but
man,
no.
I was going to tell you I have had like fantasies. I was a talking head on CNN for quite some time, and for me my experience was I just got, this is way before, I mean, this is like years and years and years ago, right? But even before the CNN we have now, but I was so fed up with the phoniness, with the insincerity, with the massive marginalization of real topics and the women who got to speak about it, that I would have these fantasies about literally like blowing up my career by saying what I really felt on camera, which now I kind of,
It's so funny. One day, the Bill O'Reilly show would always reach out to ask me to be on because I was a liberal Democrat. And I had a plan to do that. I was like, I'm going to go on O'Reilly and I'm going to go on like a pro-choice, like woman rant. And I was all ready. And then they canceled at the last minute. And then, yeah. So.
do you know that I was on O'Reilly? And do you know that he cut the mic off on me?
Oh my God. Is it on YouTube? Can I go
I
watch
hope
it?
it is. We have to go. No, I actually don't think it's on YouTube. I've looked for it before, but let me tell you, like, random side story. I did Oprah for my first book. And when I was on Oprah, I made a comment about Clinton. Now, I am also a fairly liberal person, but we were talking about kids and sex. And it was when Clinton had come out to say that oral sex isn't sex. And so I had mentioned that, right, on the show, not trying to take partisan sides, but trying to talk about how adults need to speak with real, issues to kids. Okay. So I was not savvy enough media-wise to know that on a program like that, I had every conservative station calling me afterwards, thinking that I was somehow slamming the president. Now, meanwhile, I had a book to sell. So I was like, woo, G. Gordon Liddy? Yeah. Bill O'Reilly? Sure. And then I was put on these shows to obviously be just like you, like that token liberal lady.
Yeah.
And he kept calling me Jennifer. And I corrected him and he kept calling me Jennifer. And then I called him Chris Matthews and he cut the mic off on me.
That's brilliant. Oh my God.
I can't find it. I've tried to find it. If anybody has it, let me know.
That would be.
Yeah, it was crazy. But those are the moments, I think, for me, working, not, I also have worked in the public sector enough and with brands and businesses and media companies that there does come a time, I think, where one reckons with like how much bullshit is the bullshit that I can put up with in my life. Like you have to parse it out. And I'm definitely I'm at an intersection in my life, possibly because of age and stage. I'm mid-age. I'm 46. I am super perimenopausal. I am like in the middle
sweating
of
so much right now.
we have the air jacked up in here. I am experiencing life and body changes and spiritual changes and emotional changes that I just don't find there to be enough of a community for, and I want to talk about those things. That's where my people live now. It's not like I could give a shit about what celebrities are doing. I don't want to talk about celebrity life. I want to talk about how we make a good life right now.
But I have to say, Jess, that I have looked to you for years as someone who I admire so much and think I want to be like her. And you're only like 2.5 years older than me. You're not older than me, but I have always felt that you were that person even before you did, probably.
I think so. Yeah, I don't have that view of myself. I feel like I'm always the one trying to catch up with like where I think I'm supposed to be. And now I'm at the place, I think honestly, the breakdown that I had, that breakthrough of like, oh, I care about a lot of things I'm not spending time on. I care about a lot of people I'm not spending time with. And I think for me, it was the anxiety, but it was also coupled with loss. I had lost people that I loved at this age and stage of life. And one of them was my age.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember that being like a big wake up call of like, wow, if I, God willing, get the rest of, a double amount of what I've got now, if I get to live, let's say to be 80, 88 or whatever that is, right? Like I basically get like the rest of my life to do something over, right? To have a whole new lifetime. But this time I don't have to learn how to walk and eat and poop and like do all those things. I know how to do those. I now have to learn how to take care of myself for me, not my parents, not undoing their stuff, not running away from X, Y, or Z relationship, but like I get to figure out what I really want. That's where I sit right now. And it's exhilarating and it's also terrifying.
It is terrifying because you have to relearn a lot of stuff.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Especially now. Do you think, I know you talk a lot with leaders. I know your podcast is about leadership as well. And I know you talk with a lot of impressive people in their worlds about real things, about deep things. I'm curious what your take is on how the leaders that you know are reacting and responding to the cultural world that we're in right now, like what's happening, let alone the pandemic, which, you know, we've all been in quarantine the last couple of months or so, but more so the eruption of long overdue conversations, protests, reckoning again around racial violence and racism and systemic racism. I'm curious, like what you're thinking about as a leader, talking about the inner workings of us and anxiety and depression during this time.
I um I think we are in a huge transition point in leadership success culture between the era we grew up in, and that has been the leadership model for hundreds of years now in Western culture, which is a white man standing in the front of the room telling you what to do. Um, and we are at an inflection point and a reckoning, and I hope a transition forever, where that model is going to go.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that white men can't lead anymore. Of course they can, but they can't lead in the command and control, zero emotion, no vulnerability, no collaboration model. So like we're in a very messy moment, and I think that you see that in terms of everything that's, from Me Too to what's happening right now in the aftermath of the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. It's, the old ways I think are gone.
Yeah.
But I think what I see if I talk to corporate, and you probably would know better than me, is I think there's a lot of confusion right now.
Yeah. I think there's my experience in the corporate space is that people who are in leadership, who have not had diverse leadership teams, have known that they don't have diverse leadership teams and have felt like they could get away with it for a long period of time because there wasn't a public reckoning about this. And I think what I'm seeing in multiple industries is this scuttling, this like urgency now to like make it right in like 24 hours and like
Right.
fix it. And
Which
like
the hubris of that
is
blows me
insane.
away too.
Insane.
It's
Yeah.
this is what organizations do. It
Yep.
happened during Me Too. It's
Yep.
like, let's undo the deepest structural inequities of hundreds of years by Tuesday, please.
Right. And please put it on brand. Make it on brand.
Right,
Like
exactly. And make it go viral.
yeah, and make it go viral. I feel like that's still the systemic barrier that I work in, and sometimes I get pretty fatigued by it. I mean, I love being a creative social advocate inside of a business. I love some of the work that we've done. I don't love the deeper like sheer wall I face of indifference and then feigned interest when there's like a cultural moment in that is making people urgently look at things. But I you know I just I'm more look I come to my clients now, and I say, look, we got to do the inner work. You've always had to do the inner work, but now you have to do the inner work more than ever before, and nobody's going to reward you for that. Like you got to do it because you have to do it. And I actually liken it quite a bit to the work we would do on ourselves. Like I don't, I'm not like, I don't believe in like the companies or people, but I do believe companies are made up of people. And I think we have to like look at that. I mean,
Companies are systems.
they are
One of my
systems.
favorite leadership thinkers is actually a Christian pastor named Steve Cuss, and he does family systems theory work with organizations. And so,
Mm,
if Papa's in charge and Papa is holding on for dear life and scared of change and resistant, then what does the family system have to do in order to try to either, get Papa to make room for other people. I mean, I think we're so ingrained in these systems. And the thing that scares me now with the economy is that fear-based decisions aren't good decisions either.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that everybody right now, and for good reason, is feeling a lack of abundance, and the very human tendency we have to sort of hold tight and count our acorns before the winter.
Yeah.
And so I worry about really like good systemic change in these organizations when they're in such a climate of economic fear.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
It's
look,
not.
I made the decision long ago in my day job. So in my day job, I'm an internet marketing, social media consultant. I have a very small firm, and we only work with mission-driven organizations. And I sort of made that decision and was like, yeah, I'm cool. Like I'm not going to make as much money as I could. This is what we're going to do. But I'm realizing also now that I have manifested as much privilege in my do-gooder business as I would if I were working in corporate America. And I have a lot of walls I have to tear down.
Yeah.
I for many years have gotten away with, well, we work with nonprofits, we work on good things, so I don't have to do the deep work of looking inside myself.
I
And
understand that.
yeah,
I
that's not
understand
true.
that too. I think that anybody, I think, who's in any kind of social justice work, working, especially if you're white and coming from a place of privilege, there've been, I think this is, I keep using the word reckoning in this interview, and I've been using it a lot because it's just, or Brene would say, we're rumbling, like we're definitely, we're rumbling with the privilege. We're reckoning with our responsibility. And I also am noticing like the acute anxiety that lays on top of this for people around the health pandemic we're also in the middle of, and around the separation we've had from loved ones, and routine and ritual and milestones and the things that make communities thrive and make people feel connected. There's a lot of factors at play
Well,
right
and
now.
it's all about anxiety and fear of loss,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that makes me scared, is that if we're all feeling fear, anxiety about talking to each other, about messing up on a public stage, about people dying that we love, about going broke. I mean, the fears are so big right now.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
I
And it
just
could.
want to acknowledge that for people.
Yeah, me too. I think it's the tendency then to want to shut down and hide because it feels so overwhelming, and the amount of moral courage and fortitude it takes to like just keep showing up or keep opening up. That's what I tell myself anyway right now. I'm like, you don't have to save the world. You just have to do well for yourself today. Like, and by that I mean, taking care so that I can take care.
Well, I
But
think that's right. I think that's right. And then I wanted to say one thing,
yeah.
which is that, that was sort of from like a very white perspective, because once someone said to me last week, which is that, the fear that you fear about your children now in COVID is a fear that
Mm,
I feel with my children leaving the house. Imagine how that feels. And that was extremely sobering for me.
yeah.
I just wanted to say that.
I think you're right. I think all of us are having very different conversations based on
Yes.
where we have come from. I'm curious because you mentioned something I'm picking up that I think is like definitely a key theme for me in this program is the idea of sort of like of urgently living, of urgently creating something. And I don't mean it in the rise and grind kind of way. I don't mean it in the like, you must hurry. I mean it more in the urgency of like, it feels good. It feels
You're so
right.
excited about this idea. You can't
Yeah.
sleep. You have to do it right
Yeah.
now.
Or that it's like, I can just like, when I think, cause I always have this default switch in my head where I'm like, I have a version of my life that I think about all the time. And it's what keeps me going, right? Because I urgently want to create this, like whether it's more balance or simplicity or, and so I'm curious, like right now, even though there is a lot swirling, is there something that you're urgently looking to create or manifest in your life right now? Doesn't have to be a thing. I'm just curious, like
I,
an
you,
idea.
okay, so I'm going to give myself some compliments, which is that the best part of who I am, and I think also created out of anxiety, is that I don't hem and haw when there's something I want to do. I
Hmm.
I am deeply, deeply generative and creative, and I don't care if it's a success or if I mess it up or if I just do it for 6 weeks. That's the upside of my anxiety, is that if I have a creative idea at 6 in the morning, I will like own the domain name by 7:30. Right. Um, so that is how I live. And that is the thing that I want to tell people who have anxiety, is that when you can manage it and be in dialogue, you can let loose so many great things, so I every day, on a good day, I wake up and there's 8 billion things I want to do in the day, because I want to do them. I want to do my chickens. I want to learn about this kind of art. I want to record this podcast. I want to write this article. Oh, I have a new book idea. I want to do this with my company. And so I'm overwhelmed by my generativity, and I just I want to do more of that. But so that's not my issue. Every day I wake up urgently wanting to do things that I love.
Well, then how do you land? How do you focus then out of all of those things? How do you give birth to those moments to have their own, their own timing? Do you have to like cycle through them and kind of prioritize? Like, how do you?
Sometimes there's too much, and I in the day, and I lose my mind. The dog barfed and the chickens got loose and my kids are screaming and I'm on deadline, and but I have systems. I schedule. I do a lot of journaling. I make priorities. But I just wanted to say that, like, I think that if you get to a place in your life where you can let yourself be driven by your feelings, you can actually wake up every day and feel like there's something you have to urgently do that you love, that isn't, paying your taxes.
Yeah, I don't think anybody really loves that. Do you, this is kind of a big question, but do you have a fear of death and dying? Or what is your relationship to death?
For me, it's connected with my children.
I'm sure.
The thought of, we've all had friends we've lost, right?
Yeah.
With kids. And
yeah. And do you talk about it? Do you talk about it with them? Like, in death in general, not just your death, but like death in general. Is that a convo
we
you
have
have?
chickens and lots of critters. And so we have dead carcasses around our house.
Oh my.
On a general, every day, pretty much.
Wow.
The cat will clean up dead chipmunks and bunnies. And I know this sounds silly, but I think that the circle of life in our house with the kids is totally part of what they're used to. Watching it on the news and experiencing it, we had, a mother in my son's class died last year very suddenly, and they had just had a play date the week before. How do you cope with that? So, it's hard.
Yeah. It is hard. And I think sometimes the world does knock at our door for parents, I imagine more so, to have to learn how to navigate what to say, when to say it, and every family is different. Everybody's preferences are different. I'm curious, on the flip side of that, the other quest of this program is to talk about what it means to live a good life. And I'm curious, in the stage and age of where you're at now in your world, like, what does living a good life look like to you? What does it mean to you?
It means having looked at your life, waking up and thinking, this is the life I chose. I think that, and again, there's privilege in that question. I think that for me, that is my guide star, my guiding star. I do not want to dread Monday. I want to look at my life and think, with all of the stress and mess, this is the life I chose. This is the partner I chose. This is the place I chose to live. This is the work I chose. All these animals throwing up on my rug, I chose them.
Yeah, I get that.
I have 14 pets.
Do you really?
Well, no, 13. We lost a chicken last week. Yeah, 13 pets.
Oh, what are they comprised of? Chickens, dogs, and cats?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, I chose
That's
that.
incredible. I like animals a hell of a lot more than people, so
Me
I would
too.
probably love to come and visit your abode with pets. Yeah, I can feel that, a theme throughout these conversations I've had is intentionality, which I hear a little bit in your answer, right? The idea that we're being thoughtful and choiceful. And you're right,
It's different than being happy.
it is different than being happy. And I will say, yes, there is absolute privilege in that concept because there are systemic barriers that do not allow
Yes.
people to be choiceful. And I, I, I understand and I'm aware of that. I also, and I should say, I think about where we can be choiceful, what is in our control, how do we make the most of this time? We are we all are born, we are all going to die. We have the same beginning and the same ending. But what we do in the middle of it, that's the stuff I'm so fascinated by. And like you, my version of a good life is um leaving the world better than how I found it in whatever way I can. I think for me right now, and it changes, but my version of a good life is knowing myself more, feeling like I could say I've
Mm.
spent some good time learning about me and loving me. Um, but mostly the learning about part. I'm trying to find the fun in that and the joy in that versus feeling like I'm supposed to have it figured out already. Because
You're never going to have it figured out,
no,
right?
we
I
don't get
mean,
out of this world alive. So that's the whole point. Like, who knows when my lesson's over, but I just want to at least be enjoying it while I'm doing it, for God's sake.
yeah, I mean, I feel so blessed in my life. I feel that it is so full of love and it
Mm,
is so full of stress and people needing me and people depending on me for their income and their livelihood and their breakfast and dinner and their butts wiped and all of it, and the older I get, the more I recognize the gift in that.
hmm.
So I try to not dwell in I'm trying to not dwell in the stress and the chaos and just really dwell in the abundance.
Yeah. You mentioned the love in your life. I guess my last question is, what is bringing you joy these days? What makes you feel the most joy?
I can't believe I made it to the last question without crying.
Yeah.
Um, I really feel I have a 5-year-old daughter,
Hmm.
and every little drawing she draws is full of hearts and says love. And she is love. She's not old
Yeah.
enough yet to have built any armor.
Yeah.
And she just loves me and I just love her. And oh my God.
Yeah. That's the good stuff for sure. I love that. No, I love you. Oh, I wish I could be there to put my arms around you this freaking pandemic.
I know.
Yeah. Thank you for
Thank you for
that.
making me remember that.
Isn't that beautiful? What a gift you have to have that little pure bundle of joy and love. And you're right. And to think about the newness of her life and what she's going to be able to build and grow with
Oh my
all of what
God.
you've built and grown. That's a beautiful legacy. I think part of living a good life too is the legacies we leave behind. And when we're thoughtful and intentional, they can be quite wonderful. The funniest thing about talking to somebody as accomplished as Morra is that we actually spent very little time in this interview talking about her accomplishments. I mean, she has worked at some of the highest levels of politics, of international nonprofits. She has been behind some incredible campaigns and PR moments. But I guess in the way, like when I do this program, none of our resume stuff is really what I want to focus on because while very impressive, I have wonderfully impressive people on this show, and I never mean to take away from any of those professional accomplishments. And I'm very interested in talking to people about who they are as people. And I thought Morra just showed up so beautifully in this conversation today. Her real challenges and struggles as a parent with anxiety, certainly her life as a child growing up with an anxious mother really resonated. And I'm sure will resonate for a lot of people listening and watching. When we are children and we grow up in a home where we know there is something going on with our parents, it does impact us. It creates a hypersensitivity, a hypervigilance we talked about. And of course, anxiety and depression is something that we're studying and looking more at around its hereditary factors and just how we're going to manage it in a world where we are plugged in and wired 24/7. So I love that we were able to go there and talk about those things. That really resonated for me. She obviously felt like a safe place for me to talk about my own experiences. There are some things that I shared on the show today that I just haven't shared publicly all in one place before. But I feel like in the spirit of normalizing those of us who live with anxiety and depression and other mental health illnesses, I feel like it's really important that we name it and we talk about it and we do so with all the love that we can. And so that was my intention. And I'm curious what this brought up for you. If you've been listening and you also struggle with these things, if you've got questions, we barely skim the surface with I think what Morra could really help us with. So if we want to bring Morra back on for more, I'm happy to do that. Let me know what resonated for you, what kind of questions or ideas you might have after listening to that podcast. You can always reach me at podcast@jesswiener.com. And as always, thank you, thank you, thank you for following me on this journey. You've been listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with me, Jess Wiener. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can also watch this podcast by checking out my YouTube channel for filmed episodes, behind the scenes footage, and all other kinds of amazing video goodies. And of course, you can always visit me at jesswiener.com. We're All Gonna Die Anyway is exec produced by me and produced by Lauren Chavez Myers. Our episodes are recorded, filmed, and edited by Jeff Franklin and Adam Lippert of B Film. And our original amazing music is by Becca and Destiny Petrell. As always, I want to send a special thank you to the love of my life, the amor de mi vida, Felipe Lopez. And if you love this podcast, please make sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, if there is something that stood out to you from today's episode, I want to hear about it. So if you want to share your own story, leave a comment, ask a question, please send me an email at podcast@jesswiener.com. I can't wait to hear from you. Bye, babies.